for every one of you, there's some set of things that you're thinking about right now that define success for you. And that's really what we want to have tonight, is just a conversation about what is success. And so to start off, I want to have the panelists, I'll start with Andy, give me an example of something that, or an instance where you felt successful.
I'm not hesitating because I have so many things to say. I'm trying to come up with anything to say.
As a decorated teacher, one of the very popular faculty members.
I guess that's one measure of my success, I believe, is when my students are successful. So I mentioned that to some of my students who are sitting in the audience in their class. How do I measure my success as a teacher? It's by how well my students do in the course, how much they learn and how well they do. And so we're always hoping that our students do as well as they possibly can. I think I'd like to talk about success in that contrast with failure, because I think that could be a question that could come up next. One of the incidents I think about, I'm trying to think of an example that might be relevant to you, is when I was about your age, I dropped out of college. I was a junior at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo studying aeronautical engineering, and I decided to drop out, which is a tough decision. And I think some people would look at dropping out of college as failure, like I didn't graduate. But the flip side of it was I was taking a job at Apple Computer. And this is back in the late 80s. And so I grew up in Cupertino, California, which is the home of Apple Computer. And I think that any story that I would tell you about a success, or any story that I would tell you about failure, would have that other complement to it. Every story of failure turns into a success in a different way. Every story of success has elements in it where I sort of didn't succeed as much as I would have liked. So for me, I know we'll get into it a little bit further into our discussion. Success is not so much about achieving some particular goal. I've never really thought of it as attaining that thing. It's always been for me about making progress towards some worthy ideal.
Great, thank you, Andy. Johnson.
Is this on? No. Success? Yeah, success is being able to project my voice across this beautiful room here. It's great to see you all. I have very modest aspirations. I consider it a success that I made it here today, because I started at 3 a.m. in the morning on the West Coast, and several flights later, I actually found myself here. I'm really grateful. So you have to celebrate small wins, So an example of success, or
or something that made you feel personally successful.
I married a lady 39 years ago, and she's still with me. It speaks much more to her than to me, but I was successful because I identified her. So in terms of success, so I was thinking about this one example. I was a freshman at University of Waterloo. I was a math major, and so I was on a math scholarship. They sent me into some sort of fancy math class. There was a small group of people. There was a heavily Russian accented man in the front, and the first thing he told us was, "You can't really teach math. You either have it or don't." And then he gave us an exam, and I got 16 out of 100. I consider that actually, at the time I thought it was like my whole world was collapsing, because, I was on a 4-year math scholarship and everything. But I thought it turned out that it was actually a really cool thing, because then I realized, I'm never going to be like this guy, and I'm never going to be like these Putnam team members that I had in my cohort. I decided to do something broader. I became an accountant, business major, and I took as many humanities classes as I could. That worked out really well for me. It wasn't the way I wanted to start my career in college, but so sometimes it's hard to know what's a success and what's not. I don't know if that.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you and Andy are on the same page, that you learned something from that, and it took you in a different direction.
Yeah, for sure. I think every time that you aspire to something, you got some goal that you set for yourself and you want to achieve that, and you don't, you feel like you failed in some way. But in every case that I had, whether it's a failed startup company, I learned a lot from that experience. I learned what I'm not going to do next time. I've made friends during a very difficult time that I'm going to have for the rest of my life. When one of my companies did reasonably well, I went back to school. I guess I shouldn't finish my story by saying I did earn my bachelor's degree. Keep your applause for the end, please. Then I got my PhD, and my wife at the time said she wanted to live in Franklin, Tennessee, near her mother. And so I thought, well, I guess I'll get a job at whatever university is near Franklin, Tennessee, and that turned out to be Vanderbilt. And so as you know, as professors, you don't just say, I'm going to go get a job at this university. But I aspired to do that, and so here I am. And so I guess a success would have been aspiring to get a job at this institution so my family could live in the city that I wanted. And I've been here for 18 years since, with lots of ups and downs, of course, professionally and personally. But, so I guess, to finish off, round off a little bit of what you and I both said, there's successes that are super obvious, and then successes that ultimately come about as a result of things not quite working out the way you wanted, but kind of working out for the best. And it surprises you, but you look at that in a positive way and move forward.
So, you're both making this contrast between success and failure. And I guess I'm kind of wondering, can success be defined outside of failure?
Yeah. All right, well, let me try that. Okay, so let me just first ask you a question. How many of you want to be successful? But let's put it the other way. How many of you don't want to be successful? Yeah, very few people don't want to be successful, right? But what about being a successful liar, or a successful cheat, or a successful terrorist? That's not so great, right? When we think about success, we are simply talking about the attainment of a goal, of an objective or a target, right? But whether or not it is actually good success depends on your goal, right? The success of a knife is to cut because it was designed to cut. The success of a racehorse is to run because it was bred to run. The success of the football coach at Stanford is to beat Cal. Sorry, Chase, where are you? No, but I mean, no. But what about success as a human being, right? That really depends on what you think a human being is. And that requires you to think a little deeper. It can't just be that you kind of wake up one day and say, I know what success is. Maybe that's why you're here. Because I think that when you reflect on what you're aiming for, I feel like life is sometimes like a dynamic programming problem. Anybody do dynamic programming? So you solve these things backwards. You go to where you're going to go and you solve it from the end, right? So ask yourself, what would make this journey worthwhile at the end, right? What would really be missing if you didn't do? Right? And then sort of work backwards, and you can kind of get a sense of, what you need to do today to get there. Like for me, I'm a Christian. I wasn't born a Christian. At 24, I became one, and so that made a huge difference to me because I suddenly had a center of gravity in my life, and so. That had an impact on how I chose my career, what I chose to study, who I chose to marry, my attitude towards my work. So for me, success, requires me to have some metaphysical commitment to a wider worldview. It's the answers to the question that the security guard asks you, like, who are you? What are you doing here? Where are you going, right? The most basic questions about the worldview that you have, your beliefs, your values, your foundations. It's from there that you draw the nutrients you need to grow a life that you want to feel good about, right? So at the end of the day, we're asking ourselves some very big questions. And it's only in that context that you can begin to sort of think about the human, what is a success as a human being, right? Am I allowed to keep going? Or
Oh yeah, you looked like you had one more thing. I didn't want to cut you off.
Oh yeah, well it would have been too long.
I can.
I'll try to sneak it in another time.
Okay. But I think you both argued early that sometimes a failure, quote unquote, maybe you learned that the goal wasn't the right goal, right? That it sent you on some different path, even if that maybe wasn't something you planned. Is that right? I don't want to put words in your mouth. Does that sound?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that many students that I talk to believe that the opposite of success is failure. But failure is a requirement for success, right? Any project that you work on is not just going to simply work the first time, right? You're always going to run into some obstacle, some roadblock that you have to work around. In the process of doing that, you're going to learn something from that experience. And so for me, I would say success is not some destination. I always think of it as a process. You know, I think about keeping my head down, moving forward one step at a time, and getting better and better at whatever I'm trying to do. So sure, I have goals, and there's some long-term objective, but really for me, it's about improving the process, just getting better at being a good learner, right? Getting better at being a more effective teacher, being a better father. And you're gonna make lots of mistakes along the way, but if you're reflective, if you're thoughtful, each one of those mistakes becomes something that you learn from and you can grow from. And so I guess, you know, it's interesting as we talk about successes and failures, both of them, I don't really characterize that way. I characterize them as experiences. And you can learn from any experience. And sometimes what we would call failures are the best teachers.
Okay.
Take it in.
Okay, I'm gonna. So sometimes when we sit here and talk about these things, I feel a little bit like we're coaches and we have a whiteboard and we put X's and O's. That's the way the plays should come out. Okay. But when you actually get on the football field, there's mud. There is all sorts of stuff. And who is it? Mike Tyson said that, you know, everybody is got a plan until they get hit and punch them out. Life comes at you really fast. We'd like to be able to say, okay, well, you know, I failed, but hey, I'm one step closer to the next success. That's not how it feels when you first get that punch in the mouth. Okay. So the thing that strikes me as really interesting as a behavioral economist is, hey, what is it? What is it that makes us take it so personally when we screw up? Like, you know, think about this. Success or failure at a task, and success or failure or worth as a human being should be separable, correct? I can kind of fail at this, but that doesn't make me a less valuable human being, does it? But why is it that every time we get negative feedback on almost any little crappy little thing that happens during the day, I feel higher or lower in my self-worth column? Why is it that we have such a fragile sense of self-esteem, that our sense of worth go up and down more than the stock market, which is really going up and down? Now that I find interesting because that to me is tied to my worldview. I feel like the human creature, which I study, is this curious and sad creature because it reminds me of, you know, it's the narrative in Genesis 3. I don't know if you guys, you know, in the biblical narrative, right? Adam and Eve, they're in the garden, they mess up, they eat the fruit. And then the saddest verse in the Bible to me was, it says, and then their eyes were open and they saw that they were naked. To me, that's the saddest verse because you don't unsee what you see. And then, you know, the Bible says, oh, God is wandering in the cool of the garden and says, where are you? Which is kind of, have a sense of humor. So, where are you? And then the man says, he's under the bush and he goes, I'm afraid because I'm naked, so I hid. I'm afraid. 3 emotions: fear, shame, sense of nakedness, and denial. Denial that says, so I hid. There is nobody anywhere in any culture on this planet that does not understand these 3 emotions. And every day our sense of self-worth go up and down. Up and down. What's a good day? A good day is, you know, I get a teaching award. A good day is when I get a publication. A good day when somebody, you know, smiles at me or something. What's a bad day? Bad day, someone cuts me off in traffic. Somebody yells at my dog. Why are those good days and why are those bad days? it seems like every single day we are looking for ways to affirm our sense of worth, because the bad days when you feel a little less worthy. That shouldn't be, right? Well, why can't we separate these encounters, which are events, from our fundamental worth as a human creature? Doesn't it kind of remind you of the guy sitting under the bush saying, I'm afraid because I'm naked, so I hid? So many of our decision biases have to do with this incredible need to preserve our sense of self-worth. And where does that come from? It's like when God says, Adam, who told you you were naked? That's a good question. It's like a question we may ask ourselves. Who told us? Why do we feel that way? Why do we have to keep affirming ourselves? Why do we take it so personally when we don't get success? For me, a lot of this is we really need to separate out the sort of, in theory, I can tell you, when bad stuff happened, and a whole bunch of them happened in a row, you're still the same worthwhile person I love, okay? But you may not feel very lovable or worthwhile, okay? And yet, deep down inside, okay, for me, the core of where I draw a sense of worth is actually kind of detached from the things that I'm doing. And I think that's very helpful to me. My most important thing is that I have been loved by an incredible being. And that is so important to me that by comparison, getting tenure at Stanford or running a bunch of money is actually not as important, not so important. And that's very helpful because then you can walk away from those things. Right. Am I talking too much?
Well, I feel like we're on two different themes in a way around success. One is this notion of kind of learning from failure or success, and then the feeling you might have in that process, right? I think we all can identify with some of those things. I know when I first got to graduate school at Stanford, probably all of you have had this experience in some ways. Prior to that, I had always been kind of the best student around in my class. I could look at any class at Penn State that I was in, I could look around and I know I'm gonna be number one or number two in this class, right? And I got to Stanford, and that first semester, I was like average, and it felt terrible. I mean, nobody looking at it would say I was not succeeding, but man, it sure did not feel like succeeding, right? I was average. This was awful. And that realization, maybe that's the hid part, right? But how, Andy, when you think about this entrepreneurial failing and that somehow driving towards success, how do you separate that from the feeling of failure along the way?
Yeah, there's certainly times where you have, and I've had several startup companies that have failed. And certainly when it happens, right? When you have to lay people off, you have to close the doors, and you have to, if you don't run your business properly, pay bills continuously for rent and other capital equipment that you have a long-term lease on or ownership of, that's no fun at all. But you definitely learn a lesson from that. One of the things I've learned too about business, just a quick aside, is I used to think about barriers to entry. You've all heard about that in business. What I think about is barriers to exit. If this business doesn't work, how quickly can I get off this highway and in a low-cost way? And that's been, that's basically a lesson learned from a number of failures. But I guess I don't know if I'm not as deep of a thinker as you or a feeler as some other people are. But I never really take it as personally as I think that some people do. I guess because I just do dumb things all the time. I make mistakes. The joke I had with my kids is I would do something and I'd make a mistake. I go, Daddy's not perfect. And they'd roll their eyes like, of course I'm not, right? But I'm making this joke to them about, it's okay to make mistakes. And I guess I just see throughout the day I'm constantly doing that. I'm kind of surprised when things work out the way that I'd like them to. But I do appreciate the idea that our emotions oftentimes are tied in with, our successes towards some objective, and I think sometimes how we believe we're perceived by other people, the explanations that we have to give to people about what worked and what didn't work. But when I sort of disassociate my success and failure from what people's expectations are from me, I think it allows me to sort of navigate through and to sort of accept the events that occurred as just a fork in the road. I'm just taking a left now, what I thought was going to go right, but now it's just a kind of a different path down the road.
So that brings in another element, the other people's perception of your success and failure. Certainly another piece to this story. And as I started out in the intro, kind of what I'm feeling right now, watching the articles and wondering what are they going to say. Charles, how does that factor into your thinking about success?
Yeah, well, so I think it's very difficult for you to live in a world where you do not infer something from how people might view you. I think that when my daughter was 5 years old, she once ran up on my lap and she stared me in the eyes and she looked right at my eyes and she said, "I see myself in your eyes." What she doesn't realize is how true that is. So much of how we think about ourselves have to do with the reflection that stares back at us through somebody else's eyes. But surely that cannot be the only currency of the realm. Surely there must be some other place from which you derive a sense of your worth. And there's a really cool passage in the Bible where Jesus says, if you hold on to my teaching, then you are my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. The truth will set you. So what is he talking about? So the reality is that it is very difficult to fully escape this need to find your image in the eyes of somebody else. And so our lives are shaped by those who love us and who refuse to love us. But Jesus is saying that there's something really important, that if you actually really understood how much you are loved by a creator, a good God, that you would be free. There's this wonderful book called The Freedom of Self-Forgetfulness. It's actually by Timothy Keller, who's a pastor in New York. It just basically just talks about that theme, this notion that when a center of gravity is well defined in your life, then other things do not pull you off. You have a better way of being able to put them in their place. Like, you can't own something that you can't let go of. Let me say it. You can't own something you can't let go of. Because if you can't let go of it, then it owns you. Does that make sense? I don't know if I said it right, but yeah. So remember the Lord of the Rings and that ring and all that stuff. That Hobbit. I think they picked the Hobbit because it's not very ambitious, and just one day he couldn't let go of the ring. Right? Then it no longer is something that he owns. It's something that owns him. And so it's very easy to have things like that happen in our lives. And then when that thing that is so important to you is lost or is even temporarily out of your sight, you feel like a total failure. It's just an event failure, but you attribute it as if your whole life ended. That shouldn't be. That's kind of not the right perspective. But it becomes a default perspective if you don't have a center of gravity. Mine's talking too abstract. I feel like they're so polite because I'm a guest. But yeah.
Well, then are you kind of arguing there's some different types of success or success that may be more, superior in some way, some hierarchy of success? Maybe think about that. Andy's shaking his head. So do you have a thought on that?
Well, I think that, when we talk about success and then we talk about this flip side, the contrast of failure, certainly some things that we do have higher stakes associated with them, right? If you take a really big risk on something and there could be some great upside and you achieve that, then everything's fantastic, right? And you know this in the financial markets, right? You've managed a lot of money. But there's some things that are sort of lower risk. And I think part of this concept, this calculus, when it comes to calculating success and failure is applying your resources and your emotion sort of appropriately to different challenges that you have ahead of you. And so in some circumstances, success is not an option. I do some consulting work with the military, and there are some missions that cannot fail. That's simply not an option, right? Because failure would be disastrous in many ways. And so how much preparation, how much time do you put into it, and what kind of strategies do you have to sort of work your way out of it? When I alluded a little bit towards barriers to entry and barriers to exit, having a plan B. That's nearly as agreeable to you than that goal that you set for yourself. And not putting all of your chips on the table. I have to achieve this, and if I can't, everything falls apart. So I appreciate, what you said a little bit earlier, Charles, and I wanted to comment on that. That's a little bit of what I was nodding towards with where our emotions come from. And as our children look at us, and they see us looking at them, one of I think the challenges, especially in this generation and with social media and the way that it works, one of my favorite quotes is, comparison is the thief of joy. I think it's very easy for all of us to compare ourselves to other people here at Vanderbilt, right? And we post onto social media our highlight reel, but we live our blooper reel, right? Everyone sees the cool things that we're doing, but we see all the goofy things that we're not. And it's a really great research study that I want to share with you that I talk about in one of my classes about Olympic medal winners. I don't know if you've heard about this study, but they looked at the gold, the silver, and the bronze medal winner. And they looked at how much they were smiling. Who do you think smiled the most? The gold medal winner, because they're the gold medalists. Right? They're the best in the world in that event in that year. And I think I heard somebody say it. Who smiled the next most? It wasn't the silver medalist. It was the bronze medalist. And why are they smiling? They're on the platform. They got a medal. But the silver medalist, in all of these photographs, by the way, is kind of got that frown on their face. And you're like, wow, you're the silver medalist. But who are you comparing yourself to? Who you could most believe that you could have been. If I'm the silver medalist, I could have been the gold medalist. The bronze medalist said, I could have been fourth place or out in the stands right now. And I think you're at Vanderbilt University. I mean, you've won a gold medal already to be in this audience and have the privilege of not being here with Charles, myself, and Eric, but to be here and to be healthy and to have these opportunities to think and to learn and develop relationships. And then when you see somebody do something a little better, I think it feels like you're the silver medalist, right? That could have been so much more. And I think this idea of a sense of gratitude, of being that bronze medalist, right? You're not the first place, you're not even the second place, but you're a winner. And so I think comparison can be the thief of joy, but I think the wrong comparison. So I guess whenever I felt, times low about myself and about the failure, I sometimes think what could have been. And I don't think about the gold medal, I think about fourth place or 17th place. In every 100-yard dash, there's somebody in last place, running, watching the entire field run away from them, even though they know in their mind, I'm at the Olympics. And so I guess one of my strategies, maybe to assuage these feelings that I have and those times where I feel like I haven't been successful, is to really have gratitude for the chance to have the opportunity. And even in my failure, to have a great bronze medal that I can walk away with. So I guess that's a strategy in those cases where you are comparing yourself to others. How do you compare yourself in a way that ultimately is functional?
Yeah, so I do agree that it's a good idea. In behavioral literature, we call it hedonic framing. because
Right.
in some ways you frame it in such a way that it becomes much more palatable. It's like that cartoon of what Snoopy at Thanksgiving sitting out there going, everybody's having turkey, but I have dog food. He looks down and it's just, at least I'm not the turkey. So that's, what I actually would like to invite you to think about is why we need to be constantly looking for the turkey. Why can't we live turkey-free? What I mean is, I think the reason why you're here is because I do think that there are some very basic questions that you need to address in order to answer the question of what is success in my life. Okay, very basic, like what do I believe this journey is all about? Why am I here? What is important to me? How important is relationships compared to work, and how important is the actual pay in my job compared to the sense of contributing to somebody else's welfare or my own personal growth? Those really are important questions. But to answer those questions, you do need to have a sense of why you're taking this journey. That means you have to go and ask questions like, is there a God? And if there is, what does he want from me? Those are legitimate and important questions. It's part of the universal human experience. And it's scary when we actually sanitize campus to the point where we don't even talk about it. So that's why I would encourage you to ask those questions. The most popular course at Stanford right now in undergrad is a course called Designing Your Life. How many of you heard of this? Very good, very good. So so this course was so popular that so many people in undergrad taking it that the people who couldn't get in are being taught by their dorm mates. And what is the art? What is it about? It's about actually it came out of the design school. And basically what they discovered was, exactly as Professor Andy said, people have been great. Everywhere they go, they get to Stanford campus and they realize, oh, I'm not number one. And all of a sudden, there's a sense of void. And there are mental health issues, there's suicide, there's all sorts of stuff, right? So they decided to really ask people, why don't you step back and ask yourself these questions? And one of the first exercises in this Designing Your Life, by the way, it's become a New York Times bestseller. You can go look it up. I don't get any royalty. It's actually a really good book. One of the first things they asked the students to do is to actually write down your worldview. What do you think this life is about? Do you believe there's a God? What does that have to do with designing your life? Well, it has everything to do with it because you have to ask yourself those very basic questions. And then the next set of questions they ask you is, what is your work view? What do you think? They're not asking you which job do you want. They're asking you why work? What is your philosophy about the role of work in your life? So what's important to you? Why is that important? Because between the two, you have a sense of your moral compass. You have a sense of when life blows you off course, you say, oh yeah, these things are the important things in my life. I know that relationships are more important than tasks, and people are more important than things. I know that, so I'm going to go in that direction. So sorting that out is really important.
Well,
I always feel self-conscious like I talk to
no, we're going to go to the audience for some questions, and we've already been gathering a few ahead of time, and you're kind of touching near one of them, so I thought I'll just put it out there. Do success and happiness go together? Are they somehow connected?
Yeah, and I think what Charles, you said, and I'd like to reflect this for just a moment, you could be successful as a terrorist. I think you mentioned you could be a successful thief. So clearly success is not, success is the achievement of a goal. But I think what's more important is what goal is worthy of pursuit, right? What do I choose to do? What is my measure of my success? What is that goal? And then for me, I guess what I would add to what Charles said a little bit earlier, and then I'll add to that at the end, is for me, it's about the process. I'm just constantly thinking about how to get better at the things that I do, right? I think that my role as a teacher here at Vanderbilt is not to teach students what to think, but is how to think. then you choose what to think about. But now you've got tools to do that. You can get better and better every single day. And so for me, the success I feel is when I'm presented with a really thorny problem, I have no idea about how to solve it. Most of the consulting work I do, I have no idea about the business or about the product. And I think I'm getting called in by a colleague who says, Andy's a pretty bright guy though, he'll come up to speed relatively quickly, and maybe with an outsider's perspective, he can help us to think outside the box. But those are my favorite things. I think my favorite thing is to learn. And then I'm in this profession where I get to share what I've learned. And so I guess I've got sort of lucky, and I've fallen into this position to do what it is that I like to do. And that brings me joy. Whenever I learn something new, even preparing to have this conversation with you, Charles, and knowing that Eric was going to be here to moderate this, I spent a lot of time reading and thinking about these topics. And if this got canceled because of some natural disaster, I would have come away having learned a whole lot and having benefited from that. And so, is my happiness tied in with my success? I would say no, to the extent that success is achieving some sort of a goal, because once you get to it, there's always going to be another goal. We're always moving the goalposts, right? There's a point in your life where getting into Vanderbilt was the most important thing. And then you got in and it sort of seemed anticlimactic, right? Now your goal is to graduate, right? Because that's the goal for the one I didn't achieve when I was your age, but it's and then to get a job. And that's an even more challenging goal, right? And it's to get a great job and to get a promotion, and you can just constantly keep pushing back those things, never quite getting to the point where you can say, I'm happy because I've achieved that success that I've always wanted. So I guess for me, to answer the question about do happiness and success go together, my measure of success is always learning and sort of helping people to solve problems. And every day I have an opportunity to do that as a teacher and as a father and as a friend. And so I guess they go together if you qualify your success carefully. Whether you have success or failure, you're always learning. So for me, it's always a happy day, I guess.
Great. So I think happiness is overrated. Sorry, what do I mean by that? So happiness usually, I think actually we are very similar in our outlook because happiness often does, it seems to be related to some outcome, especially an anticipated outcome. So you basically say, I feel happy. But there is something else, that's a little deeper, that is quieter, but sticks with you. I call it joy. There is this awareness of a reality that you have really no right to deserve, but it is true nevertheless. That joy is really amazing. I get that when our dog looked at me. I think there is absolutely no way I deserve that. And well, it happens with my wife sometimes too. No, I mean the most valuable things in life you can't earn, right? You cannot earn it. They're gifts to you, whether it's a friendship or it's somebody's love. And they bring not the kind of happiness that is event-specific, but a steady sense of wellness or joy, which is, and indeed, just as Sandy said, it could be something like you're in the flow of solving a problem or figuring this thing out and going to your student and say, let me tell you what it really is like, because you just figured out that. So I think there is such set of happiness, but I do think joy is a state that is maybe not as event specific. It's just almost an awareness of a certain rightness of being, almost like good health.
I just noticed if I can make that comment at a meta level. Have we talked about GPA? Or salary? Or a lot of the measurements that people have of success. I don't know, I just feel like a lot of students, when they're in high school, they're trying to aspire to come to Vanderbilt. So it is all about GPA, right? It's about clubs and activities, and it's about creating that package so you'll be accepted by this university. And I think a lot of students think that's the thing that they need to do for that next level of success in getting into grad school or getting a job. But I think that when you hear from slightly older folks, and when I think about my father, and I think about my mother, and I think about giving my father's eulogy, and when you have to say something about somebody at the end of their life, something that's so important to you, you think, what is it that I can say that's the most important quality of their life and their contribution to me. And what I talked about is his kindness. You know, it's like the simplest thing. It's just being kind. And that doesn't cost anything. And to me, that's ways that I can think of being successful. So I guess what I wanted to say at that level is what I think you're trying to convey, what I'm trying to convey, what you're talking about and shaping the conversation about is not those traditional measures, those numeric measures that you mentioned at the beginning of your introduction, but it's these deeper feelings of contributing to others. You know, I think about altruism as a guiding principle, putting other people's needs ahead of your own. And sometimes that's just a simple act of kindness, smiling at somebody, saying a kind word, and that brings joy to them, brings joy to me.
Mike, questions from the audience. Mike is going to run the mic.
Hi, thank you for the discussion. I think I have two questions. So first is regarding conflicting interests in, so as you said, there are like many definition and pathway to success. And I'm just wondering if you have like different goals and different success you want to achieve, and there are like conflicting interests within those goals. How do you moderate that? Like, if I wanna spend time with my family, but my job wouldn't allow me to, and if I wanna stick to certain political ideology, and like this job require me to be working heavily or like be involved or change myself.
Great. So, okay.
Go ahead.
All right, so those are exactly the great questions you need to have and why we are here. You know, we spent all our time talking about knowledge, which is very sectoral and very specific, technical. But what you're talking about is wisdom. Wisdom is how to live well and to esteem that which is worthy of esteem and to value that which is valuable. And when you're trading things off, like your relationship, people that you're close to you, with the decision whether to relocate somewhere to get a job, that requires wisdom, because that is not a trade-off somebody else is going to be able to pay for you. You're going to have to trade off a lot of different things. And so I don't know if I have a right way to do it for you, but I do think that thinking out clearly what things are priorities, what are key priorities, what are the unnegotiables, what are the softly negotiables, and what are the you can have it type things in your life. I remember I was at a school in Southern California, and I remember seeing this kid walking down the hallway at college, and he was wearing a t-shirt, and there were 3 phrases on it. The first big word was God, and the next one was slightly smaller font, family, and then the third one says, Golden State Warriors. I took a picture with him because I thought this kid kind of knew what was important in his life, right? You may not have the same priority or ranking, but it is helpful to have a ranking. I'm very clear about things and relationships that are central to my life. And it is relational. To me, the key priorities are all relational. My relationship vertically with the God that I believe created me, loved me, gave himself for me. That is really important. But it turns out that he actually cares about the people closest to me. So therefore, they are very next set of priorities to me. Their well-being, the fact that they're flourishing, is the next set of really important things to me, whether that be my colleagues, my students, my family. And then I go and sort other things out. I arrange things for the purpose of making those relationships more right. My responsibilities, whether I'm running a lot of money or whether I'm a professor, are means through which I make those relationships more right. So at the end of the day, like I tell my students, once they ask me to say, summarize what you might want to tell us about this last lecture or something. And so I said the first thing is human beings have intrinsic value. Intrinsic value, not functional value. Functional value is how useful someone is to you. not commercial value, which is what they can get in the marketplace. They're just intrinsically valuable. And actually, to me, that is really important guiding. So when I try to sort this out, I find that if I make a decision like that, I probably go to the people to whom it most matter and talk to them and see how that impacts them and see how that relationship goes. At the end of the day, it doesn't mean you're going to do what they want you to do, but it is kind of a sense of what I think is important. Does that help?
I have a follow-up question.
Very quick. Very quick.
Yeah. So that's actually the second question I was gonna ask. So like, as a non-religious person, how are there like solutions out there to reconcile that kind of like lack of center of like worth, where like.
So okay, let me just make sure I understand what you mean by non-religious, because I don't feel like I'm religious either. So I know it sounds silly, but that's true. So I do think, here's what I do think, okay? I think that every single human being has a spiritual need. I think that we all do, and so I do think that as you look for that, that is actually what you're wrestling with. When you're wrestling with having good relationships, you're actually wrestling with answering questions that are intrinsically spiritual in nature. When you ask, why am I here? The why requires a designer. Okay, if there's no purpose, then there's no why. There's just the way it goes, right? So I think when you say, see, what you're telling me is, like, the way I understand it is you say, I'm going to do a constrained optimization. I sound like a mathy. So what I want to do is I want to preclude religion, but I want to have a good life, right? But when I look at the whole picture, the very fact that people ask those religious questions are deeply related to the fact that they have to sort out these questions about what's important. They're really related. Because if we're only here for 70, 80, 90 years and then we are gone, what makes this journey worthwhile, right?
So let me offer that contrasting perspective. So as a humanist, which is someone who understands the world using reason and science for the objective of making ethical decisions to promote well-being, I think about my value by my contribution to enhancing well-being and to reduce suffering for all people, or sentient creatures. You can get a little bit further than that. And I think that the challenge for you is, how do I make these decisions between these conflicting priorities that I have? I think what's interesting, and I think what you'll learn about life, is where you spend your time is what you prioritize, no matter what you think. You could say, I prioritize my family. Well, where are you spending your time? At work. So look at how you're spending your time. And I think the other thing I'd say, and I want to be cautious too, one of my favorite sayings was, the way of the Zen masters to find their own way. Right? Charles has his way. Eric, you have your way. I have my way. Each of us has our own way. So we're sharing with you sort of our experiences. I think this challenge that I see with students, having been here for 18 years and having taught and talked to thousands of students, is this hunger to do so much. To be an A student, to be an A member of your fraternity or sorority or club or your activity, to be a great boyfriend or girlfriend, to get yourself prepared for med school, law school. There's just so many things that you're trying to do. And you want to be an A player in all those things. And it's just not possible with the amount of time that you have. And so it's a matter of balancing all those things out and accepting being a B player at some times in your life. I got to be in this class. It's not the end of the world. Because at this time, for this friend, I needed to be an A friend. So I think when you're sort of conflicted and you're trying to do it all, I think you got to, and I don't want to say be less ambitious, but to be more modest in your objectives of what you're trying to accomplish. And to be okay and to accept yourself when you don't achieve that highest level of performance. But sometimes it's just enough to put one foot in front of the other.
We'll try to take a few more questions. Answers will be quick, though, please.
Love this kid.
So,
following up about ambition in general and talking about kind of the detachment of self-worth from the outcome of your goal. How do those two coexist with one another, ambition and the detachment of self-worth from the outcome of a goal? Just in the sense that removing your sense of self-worth from the goal, does that hurt, or is that able to coexist with your ambition and goals and trying to chase those things? Like how does one affect the other?
Yes. I'm just trying to be short. No, I think what I would say is, and to basically say what I said before, repeat it briefly, is I think with respect to ambition, don't set your ambition for a specific goal that I'm trying to reach this thing. Have that out there as something that you'd like to get towards, but keep your eye just in front of you on the process of getting from here to there. And ultimately, if you don't make it to that spot, you're somewhere else, and then you're in a new position to set a new goal, a new objective. And if you're constantly making progress and improving yourself and improving the lives of other people, I think you can always call yourself a success. It's even shorter.
I was really intrigued by the idea of being successful at things that weren't good, being a successful liar, all of those things. Were there things that you were successful at on your path to getting to where you are right now that you regret, especially with the comparative perspectives of sort of a Christian deist and a humanist? Were there things that you did that you regret to get where you are now?
I think regrets are about your current life. If you love where you are, even the mistakes you've made in the past were what was required for you to get here. Regret is about unhappiness in your life at this moment. And so there are things in my life that weren't, if I could go back in a time machine, I don't know that I would change them, even if they were mistakes or failures. Because if I made any of them, I wouldn't be sitting here next to you, Charles, and next to Eric, and have my children and the life that I live today. So with respect to regret, I love my life, and I'm gracious, or I have gratitude for being here and to have the relationships that I do, even though in the past, there were things that didn't turn out the way that I wanted. So for me, regrets are not about the past, they're about the present, and if I can appreciate them.
Good evening. So I'm not sure if this question is going to make any sense, but when you were talking about the Lord of the Rings reference and kind of the concept of something owning you versus you owning it, do you think that the object or the ring in that metaphor could be replaced with like a human or relationship?
Yes. Yeah. I think that is exactly true. I think, the human need deep down inside for a sense of purpose and meaning, a sense of belonging, and a sense of worth is really deep. But when we glom onto something or someone as what the main place from which we draw this, sometimes we put too much weight on that person or thing, and they can't bear it, and it's not their fault. So, yeah, I do think that there is someone in my life who can bear it, and I see it as a vertical relationship. How many of you have read this book called This Is Water? Yeah, do you remember who that was? Do you remember the name of the author?
David Foster Wallace.
David Foster Wallace. If you ever look up this book, it's called This Is Water, 2005, David Foster Wallace. It was the commencement address to the Kenyon College graduates, right? This is water. And basically he has a passage in there in which he says, in this world, there's actually no such thing as atheism. You're going to be worshiping something. And a very good reason for worshiping something like, he's not a Christian, or like Jesus, or like something else, is that almost anything else that you worship, that is, you put in the center of your life, will eat you alive if you actually treat it as where your worth comes from. So he says, if you worship intellect, actually you will always feel dumb. always feel like you're a fraud. That never happens with professors, right? So if you worship beauty and allure, you always feel ugly, and you always feel like if you worship your money or power, you always feel like you never had enough. And so this natural center of gravity is the way we were created. We're going to end up having something in the center of gravity. Actually, I became a Christian for a couple reasons. One was my dad got cancer, and I just couldn't understand how life worked. And then through that, the other one was I had a failed relationship. The relationship was very important to me, but I, through that process, discovered the flaws, not only in this whole idea of, if you find the right person, you find your soulmate, life is fabulous from then on. It doesn't work that way. And through that process, I actually came to realize that another relationship was actually even more elemental and more important.
Hi, I want to go really back really quickly to the conversation on regret. Kind of conversation that happened was, if you can appreciate the present, then like the regrets of the past are worth it, if I heard that correctly, or not necessarily worth it, but like kind of they're overshadowed by appreciating the present. I wanted to take that a level deeper and talk about the kind of the shame we talked about from the beginning. Shame being like something that uses facts and evidence from your past to tell you who you are in the present. How do you reconcile the feelings of shame, which will come up again because you are going to tell yourself, I am this based on this, with being able to appreciate the present? How can you, on your own accord, outshadow that shame, that past, with the present?
What a great question.
I think it's a recognition that we're not perfect, and we always try to get better. And if you look back on your life and say, I was not perfect, I was awful in some respect. And so I think we try to do the best that we can until we learn better, and then we try to do that. And so if you say to yourself, and not you, but one, says to themselves, this is who I was, and this is something I'm not proud of, and it's something that I sort of regret to the extent that I hurt other people, but I am better now. I'm going to be even better in these relationships. And to recognize within yourself what that growth is, then I think there's room to forgive yourself and to recognize that we're not perfect now, but we try to be a little better every single day. And there's things in my life that I wish I hadn't said, I wish I hadn't done. I wish I could take it back so much. But I was younger, and I learned from that experience, and now I pay it forward in a way. And I think that's what has helped me in those times. And I guess I'm so glad to be in the position that I am now, to be a better person as a result of learning from those experiences previously. So take that thing that you've done and double down and be twice as good as a result of that.
Yeah. Sometimes, self-forgiveness is really hard. It's really hard because we keep looking at it in the same way and say, gee, any reasonable person could have done what I did. I've had things like that. But what really did set me free was just this realization that the one that you need forgiveness from is not yourself. And that person whom you really need forgiveness from has already forgiven you. There's a Henry Van Dyke is a Presbyterian minister, and he had this great line. He says, self is the only true prison of the soul. Self is the only true prison of the soul. We build a really tough jail block when we want to, but really, there is someone bigger than us, and he's already let it go. He's already let it go.
Take one more question. If each of you had to recommend one book that influenced your worldview, what would it be?
One book that I just bought and sent to my son So it tells you how important it is. It's a book called The Song of the Bird by Anthony DeMello. I don't know if you've heard of that. He's a Catholic priest. And he's written this wonderful book that's sort of half religious, Catholic, half Zen, half Aesop's. That's 3 halves. So that's how good this book is. It's just wonderful. You know, for a devotional, if you just want to read a little page and think about it, there's just so many wonderful little stories and messages. So The Song of the Bird, I just think is just a book that I've gone back to and have read and have purchased and read and then given as a gift a couple dozen times in my lifetime. So I recommend that.
Okay, for me, it depends on whether you want to feed the right side of your brain or the left side. And so you want to feed the side that's more cerebral, probably Reasons for God with Tim Keller. That's a good book. Or Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. It's a really good book. If you want to feed the other side, my favorite poet is Mary Oliver. She has a book called Devotions. She was the poet laureate, but she passed away, I think, 2019. But that book is really good. Some of the best things in life you can't analyze, you just have to taste it. Like you just have to read it.
Charles, let me add one. I would add one to that is related to this particular subject, which is Counterfeit Gods. It's another Tim Keller book, but it really gets at these things that end up owning you.
Since our speakers did a great job of keeping that short, we'll do one more question.
We're going to overtime here.
Well, thank you all for being here tonight. We really appreciate it. Just as I stand here and sit and listen, I'm struck by the fact that we really are, as students in the crowd, we're in the mud, we're in the thick of it. And so it's very easy for all of our speakers today to kind of pontificate on success and how it feels from kind of this side with graying hair past
all that stuff.
Past kind of some of life's greatest difficulties.
Yes.
And so kind of in that context, I must say both worldviews sound rather exhausting. And so I guess my question for both speakers today is, how do we find rest in success and in failure? How do we find rest in any of these concepts whatsoever? Because if we're weighing it by kind of like constantly doing good things for Dr. Van Schack's kind of model, like that sounds exhausting to me. And in the same way, under the other model, there seems to be a similar level of exhaustion that I have to exert as well to continue to kind of be moral. So how, under both sides, do I find rest?
So I have a confession to make. When I was asked to prepare my comments for tonight, I spent a lot of time thinking, because frankly, I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about success or failure. I don't really think about my worldview as deeply as it might appear that I do when I sit up here and ask these questions, but I can answer the questions the way I did because I did a little bit of homework. But I would say that most of my life has just been to sort of enjoy my life and to be nice and to enjoy doing things for other people. And I think that the unexamined life is not worth living. You've heard of that. But the over-examined life is kind of a pain in the butt. If you spend all your time examining, you're not spending any time living. So I think what you're hearing from us is people with a little bit of gray hair up here being sort of asked to sit in front of a lot of people and sort of talk about these deep ideas. But I think on a day-to-day basis, it's not that like this is something that I think about on a day-to-day basis. I just think about what can I do for a friend? What meal can I cook for somebody? You know, what favor can I do? How can I support something that a student is working on? Right? And I think that when you take it day by day, a little act by a little act, it sort of adds up to 58 years of, you know, probably advice of, dude, just chill out. Enjoy life and be nice. And I think you'll do well following that advice.
So, I feel like when you ask this question, I feel like you're a very serious, good person who wants to do right and well, and it's exhausting, right? I actually feel like we are actually pretty small in this big universe. We are not driving a motorboat, we're kind of doing a sailboat, and we're only partially in control of many things. And so, you know, if you let God be God, and outcome really belongs to Him, the effort is on your side, you have laid out your availability, and He takes care of the other piece and the outcome. It's a really pretty good way to be. You know, one of my favorite Psalms is Psalm 23. I don't know if you guys, many of you are not even Christian, you can kind of, you know, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, and everything. You know, and in that there's this beautiful picture where he says, oh, he leads me through green pastures, right? And he rests in still waters. That is rest, that is peace, right? But this sheep, have you ever seen a sheep stand in the grass and resting? They're always eating. I mean, this is a sheep that's really, you know, full, content. So it's a life of no want. And then it says, I will walk through the shadow of death and I will fear no evil. So a life of no want and no fear. That is a really content life. But that's a life when the animal knows what it is. It's a sheep. When a sheep tries to be something more than a sheep, then he feels really restless because he wants to try to do all these things. But you know, there's a shepherd, and I'm just a sheep. And sheep, the only good thing a sheep could do is to realize he's a sheep, because then he knows that he needs to follow. I don't mean that, I honestly say this in sincerity of my heart, because my kids are a lot like you. I think they want to do good, really want to do good. And then one day they told me, you know, carbon foot neutral is not enough. They're doing so many things to try to make the world a better place, but they realize there's something deeper that gives us restlessness. And that's where that hole is, you know, this God-shaped hole that your designer designed in your heart. It's Augustine who says, God has created us for Himself, and we will find no rest until we find Him.